So, how many in a row is that now?
That would be 7. 7 of many.
Yes, but wouldn't we be more successful as a channel if we were losing that many in a row?
Yeah, but you gotta remember our sanity in this whole thing.
True, we did forget to factor in our sanity.
That's right, everyone. Vegas Golden Knights win again, 6-4 over the Montreal Canadiens. Now, the lineup for the Golden Knights tonight looked basically the same as it has this entire 7-game win streak now. Only change from their previous game being that Adin Hill is the goalie facing off against Montreal's Jake Allen. So the first period kind of started off a little bit on the slow side, relatively even start, a lot of neutral zone hockey, basically trading chances for the first 10 minutes of the game. Golden Knights looked good, Montreal looked good. They were all both bend but don't break. Neither wanted to give up the first goal. And it was a lot of fun but no function. You know, there was some hits, some good passes, some decent scoring opportunities. But nonetheless, nothing really was interesting or nothing really drew attention for the first 10 minutes of the game. The first real thing that happened of what would become a very high-scoring and very interesting affair between the Canadiens and the Golden Knights is Nicholas Hague getting the goal scoring, starting for the Golden Knights and putting them up 1-0. This goal came off the back of a really, really horrific turnover by the Montreal Canadiens, wherein there was a battle below the net, behind in the corner, and ultimately the Canadiens player came out with it, tried to fire it up the middle of the ice, and Hague was standing right there. Chaos ensues. Hague takes a long shot. Ultimately, Allen wound up being screened, and it was a good effort, great screen, even better shot. And ultimately, Hague lands his first Hager bomb of the year from the point. Only took him 13 games, not too bad. But ultimately, Hague's first of the year was unassisted at 13:35 of the first period. Now, ultimately, the Golden Knights are known for the good starts. We've been outscoring everybody about 1,000,000,000 in the first period. But ultimately, the Montreal Canadiens don't care, and they're going to try and even up the game. And ultimately, less than a minute later, Cole Caulfield would do just that, tying the game up at 1 apiece. This kind of took advantage of a really soft zone defensive play by Pietrangelo on Kirby Dach when he was entering the zone. Pietrangelo gave Dach way too much room to operate on the near boards. Instead of wedging him out of the play, instead of doing anything to run a little bit of interference, Pietrangelo just kind of sat there, let Dach set up. Ultimately, Caulfield was the trailer into the zone, catches the puck, takes 2 steps into just above the left faceoff dot, and beats Hill underneath the glove to tie it up. Now, that's kind of a frustrating one, given how good the Golden Knights have been defensively in mitigating shots, and unfortunately, goals like that would become a little bit of a trend in this one, as that's Caulfield's 8th of the year already from Dach and Edmondson. Now, shortly after that, a little bit of a brouhaha takes place, and we wind up with 4-on-4 hockey. Colasar gets an unsportsmanlike penalty at 14:40, and Amber Xylophone, or whatever, I've never seen a hockey name like this before, and Amber Xhekaj, Amber Xylophone take a penalty at 14:30 each. It's typical 4-on-4 hockey, but the Golden Knights were definitely more dominant of the possession over the course of this one. While they weren't able to really land a great deal of shots, they still wound up landing a couple and never really had a great scoring opportunity. They were really dominant, and it helped kind of calm things down. The rest of the period was really, really slow with little going on by comparison. And the period really ended after that with a 1-1 tie. It was kind of a slow start for the Golden Knights, but they built on it throughout the period, as they have in many games, despite the fact that they normally are the team that starts incredibly fast. They kind of built into this period, ultimately scoring with that Hague goal and then immediately having the game tied up on them, similar to what happened in Ottawa, having scored early on with the Stone goal and then immediately having Giroux come up and tied up at 1, like less than 3 minutes later. We got outshot in the period, 14-12, and Hill wasn't really getting a lot of help at this point. He was a pretty busy netminder in this first one, which isn't really a bad thing, given his numbers have been good. He's been very consistent in net, and ultimately he's barely given up any goals, so can't really blame him for wanting to get some work, but I would have preferred, from a fan's perspective, not to see 14 shots against in the opening period. Moving on into the second period, it was very clear that the Golden Knights wanted to jump out and get going, try and take advantage of a good start, as they are supposed to have done in the first period. And ultimately, that's exactly what happened, as Riley Smith would put the Golden Knights ahead 2-1 just a few minutes into the second period. Now, this goal was just typical, prototypical misfit goal. It was honestly the amount of chemistry that was resulted, the amount of chemistry and skill that made this goal happen is just astounding. This all was set up by Riley Smith moving the puck to Marchessault in the defensive zone. Marchessault skates to the board. What's to be a 3-on-2 from the red line in. Marchessault kind of peels over to the boards, lets Smith catch up, and ultimately pulls a defender, fires a slick pass to Carlson, who is skating up the middle, receives the pass, and from that point on, it's a 2-on-1 from the neutral zone in. The defender shades over to cover Carlson as they approach the dots in the offensive zone, and Carlson drags it back, pulls it around to the front, and feeds just an incredible backdoor feed to Riley Smith, who has the entire 6x4 to hit. And a player who makes $5 million a year isn't going to miss that one, and Riley Smith is exactly that, and he did not have to ask twice as he fired it right behind Jake Allen, putting the Golden Knights back in the lead. So that's Smith's 4th of the year from Carlson and Marchessault at 2:24 of the second period. Look at that. Another misfit line goal. Again, Bruce, I don't know why you even think splitting these guys up would be a good idea. Like, sure, the chemistry was good for the first couple of games, but since you put them back together, we haven't lost yet. So correlation does not equal causation, but I'm not saying anything. And so ultimately after that, the period kind of slowed down again as the Golden Knights would go back to the power play right after the goal. As Arbor, Zeisel took a cross-checking penalty at 3:04.
You do know that's not how it's pronounced. You do remember we all share the same brain. If he doesn't know how to pronounce it, you don't know how to pronounce it, and I don't know how to pronounce it. Let him have fun.
The Golden Knights pressed pretty hard throughout this entire power play, but ultimately they weren't able to light the lamp. Both waves looked pretty solid, each managing a couple of pretty decent scoring chances, but ultimately none of them wound up in the back of the net, so in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't the most successful power play in the world. This period as a whole was just incredibly frustrating for the Golden Knights. I would be here for an hour listing off every prime opportunity the Golden Knights had in the second period, but ultimately I would not want to have to edit a video that long. So I'm just going to say that it was very frustrating. They were the better team, and yet they didn't score. It had shades of the Winnipeg Jets game from last week. And whether it be the goaltender coming up big, Allen having a good game, whether it be Montreal's defensive structure working well, whatever the reason, Golden Knights were not able to score throughout the rest of the second period despite dominating in every area of the game. So looking at the second period, at one point the Golden Knights outshot Montreal 15-0, with the final tally finishing 16-8 as the Golden Knights kind of ran out of gas at the end of the second period. But again, minimal work for Hill is always a good outcome. We were dominant in all parts of the ice, but not able to capitalize on the momentum after the Smith goal and the subsequent power play that was a result of it. Ultimately, it's still a very tight game going into the third, and it's essentially a coin flip. All right, everyone, hold on to your butts. It's time for chaos hockey.
Wait a second. There were how many goals in this period?
Remember how I said this game was pretty boring right up until the point it got crazy nuts? Well, the start of the third period is when the game started to get crazy nuts. As right off the drop, the Montreal Canadiens waste no time tying up the game 2-2 on a Nick Suzuki goal. As a result of a 3-on-1, in which was really going to be a 3-on-2 until Chandler Stevenson fell down trying to cut back on defense. Can't really blame him. The ice in Montreal is probably a little choppy. Ultimately, Doc and Suzuki set up a good passing play. Those are two players you don't want because of the sheer amount of skill. And ultimately, they moved Hill just enough off the middle of the ice to free up enough space for Suzuki to slip it by for his 7th of the year from Doc and Gould at 56 seconds. And then pretty shortly after the Suzuki goal, Jordan Harris would get whistled for a holding penalty and would get to put the Golden Knights on the power play. First wave of the power play was a little off. They weren't really doing a good job getting into the zone. They kind of had a hard time sustaining pressure. And ultimately, the second wave started off with a little bit of sustained zone time and a little bit of good puck retrieval. And ultimately, that was the difference as Riley Smith would light the lamp again on the power play, putting the Golden Knights back ahead by 1 at the score of 3-2. Now, this was a greasy goal. The kind of goal that you want your second unit on the power play to score every single time. Like, I know you expect the fourth line to score greasy goals, but on the power play, you got to take them where you can get them, especially for a Golden Knights team that's historically average on the power play. This was really a long shot from Kessel that broke off of Allen, and Smith beat his man to the blue paint basically, and was able to cash in the loose change. Probably the easiest goal Smith's going to score since the one he scored in the second period. He had 2 pretty easy goals in this game. of which he had to fire them a grand total of about 4 feet. So again, he'll take the 2 goals, and the Golden Knights will take the 2 up on the board. And that's exactly what happened here. Smith's 5th of the year, 2nd of the game, from Kessel and Theodore at 4:45. And then just a few minutes later, chaos would continue as the Golden Knights would light the lamp again in the form of, surprisingly, Keegan Colasar.
Woo, Keegan Colasar, 7-Eleven, baby!
And ultimately, this goal showed us why Keegan Colasar is such an integral piece to this lineup, as this was a really high-skill goal for a fourth-line player. What seemed like a really simple play was actually very opposite. There was a really interesting but really bad Montreal turnover low in the zone. Everybody was rushing out, and Haig intercepted the clearing attempt and just kind of threw it on net. Colasar shaded in front of Allen and ultimately just reached up, deflected the puck down between his hands, and ultimately passed Allen. Now, he thought it was high stick, Allen did, and ultimately the refs didn't even take the time to review it. And while the Canadians could have challenged it, if you challenge that, you go down by 2 because you would have lost the challenge and put the Golden Knights back on the power play. That's the game, so you can't risk that challenge. Ultimately, Colasar, 2nd of the year from Haig at 8:14, gives the Golden Knights a 2-goal lead for the first time. So, and I'm out of breath already, but we're not even halfway through what this third period had, as just a few seconds later, Nick Waugh would put the Golden Knights up 5-2. This is basically right off the face-off. Carrier forced a 50-50 puck at the Montreal defensive blue line, of which he drew both Montreal defensemen, and they both missed. He kind of left the puck. Colasar comes up behind him, picks it up, catches Waugh on his right at the top of the left circle, passes it off to him. Carrier's kind of screening Allen. There's about 30,000 bodies out front, and ultimately Waugh fires it off the left post and in to give the Golden Knights another big 3-goal lead in as many nights. The scoring is working really well for this team this year. This streak has been incredible for Golden Knights scoring, and ultimately there's really no way to complain. This is 2 fourth-line goals in the span of about 20 seconds. And when your fourth line is scoring at that clip, clearly you've got something going well. That's Waugh's 3rd of the year from Colasar and Carrier at 8:35. And now the moment you've all been waiting for, as I'm sure anybody who watched this game is wondering what the heck Mr. Reaction Man here thinks about the hit on Alex Pietrangelo. Now, truth be told, I didn't really see it in real time. I thought it was just a bit of a hit. And then everybody and their mother decided to beat the crap out of each other. That's just the way it was. It was just a hit face first into the bench. It looked incredibly painful. If this hit had happened last year, I bet all the money in my wallet right now that Pietrangelo doesn't get up. He has to get stretchered off, because that's the way the injury bug was hitting the Golden Knights in the first half of last season. But mercifully, Pietrangelo got right up and proceeded to start beating the tar out of Josh Anderson, who had just leveled him into the boards. Ultimately, all the fighting, all the fisticuffs resulted in just a bevy of penalties. So let's see if I can read this all off properly. All right, a 5-minute major for Josh Anderson for boarding, a 10-minute misconduct for Anderson at 10:08, Martinez roughing at 10:08, Pietrangelo roughing at 10:08. Montreal will have a 4-on-3 power play. Wow, that's a lot all at once. Anyway, this puts the Golden Knights on their first penalty kill of the night, and ultimately it doesn't take long for them to be victimized by their lack of discipline, and by lack of discipline I mean beating the tar to Josh Anderson, as Nick Suzuki would light the lamp for the Canadians, making it 5-3. This was a good passing play, found Suzuki above the left circle, wired it past the glove of Aiden Hill. Again, just a good passing play, good shot, and good positioning, but ultimately you can only do so much when there's a perfect shot levied against you. So that's Suzuki's 8th of the year, 2nd of the game, from Doc and Caulfield at 10:21. Now, fortunately for the Golden Knights, because of the way the penalties shook out, that's the end of the power play, and ultimately now the Golden Knights get to go to a power play of their own with the duration and carryover of the Anderson 5-minute major. And ultimately, you don't want to give this version of the Golden Knights this many power play opportunities, as Jonathan Marchessault made the Montreal Canadiens pay for their transgressions and put the Golden Knights ahead 6-3 with a beauty of a goal. Now, this was really a testament, again, to how much attention Jack Eichel draws on the power play, and the fact that he's got shooters in the form of Chandler Stevenson down below the slot, Marchessault on his off wing, and Stone in the bumper. And ultimately, either Pietrangelo or Theodore on the point. There's so many shooting options that he can just post up anywhere in the zone, pick his poison, levy a perfect pass in their direction, and ultimately they're probably going to score. And that's exactly what happened in this case. Eichel was standing just above the left circle. The Montreal defenseman left a pocket for him to stand in. He drew so much time. The second they collapsed in, he passed the puck over to Marchessault, and Marchessault one-timed it past Allen, and Allen wasn't even close on this one. So that's Marchessault's 6th of the year from Eichel and Pietrangelo at 13-16. And so at this point, the Golden Knights have reestablished their 3-goal lead, and everything is seemingly okay. Until Yuri Slafkovsky makes the game interesting a little bit again and scores right out of the penalty box. Now, he was the one serving the 5-minute major for Anderson. He jumps out of the box, takes a little bit of a time to get into the zone as the Golden Knights are struggling to wedge off a Montreal Canadian player in the form of Gould. Again, this goal is very similar to the one that that Cole Caulfield scored in the first period. It was basically a carbon copy of what happened. As Gould was down the near boards on the right wing, Pietrangelo doesn't wedge him out of the play completely or put the body onto him. And ultimately, the pass comes across the middle. Slafkovsky takes it right just above the left circle and fires it glove side on Adin Hill. That's the 3rd time this game that Hill has been beaten from the left circle on the glove side. So clearly there'll be some film on that. And ultimately, you can blame Hill all you want, but the defense was not covering that play because of the way Montreal's offensive break-ins worked. So I'm going to assume Bruce Cassidy saw that. They're going to address that during meetings between now and the game against Toronto on Tuesday. But that's Slafkovsky's 3rd of the year from Gould at 15-21. Ultimately, mercifully, that's where the game ended, as although Montreal pulled Allen with about 2 minutes to go, they weren't really able to land any super high danger shots. They had a couple of solid opportunities, but Hill made the saves when he needed to, and Pietrangelo and Martinez blocked the rest. They looked really good to secure in the last minute and a half, boxing out, clearing the pucks when they need to. And ultimately, the hunt for the empty net goal still continues for the Golden Knights. We're 13 games in, and I'm pretty sure we haven't got one yet. It'll come eventually, I think. But ultimately, the game ends 6-4. The Golden Knights secure another 2 points, winning their 7th consecutive game and third on this road trip. So all I have to say is, what was that third period? Just aside from absolute chaos, it was just, what did I watch? There were 7 goals in the period, like 30 minutes of penalties, and a 5-minute major, which barely ever gets called in the modern NHL because of the Cody Eakin rule. That being said, it was an interesting period for the Golden Knights, but they definitely keep running up the score. I would have loved to have seen the score be a little bit more lopsided, whether it be 6-2, 6-3. The fact that that's 2 games in a row now that the Golden Knights have ran out to these giant leads, whether it be 5-2 in this game or 5-1 against Ottawa, the fact that the opponents have been able to come back is kind of concerning, but not the most concerning thing in the world. It's just something to keep our eyes on as fans. I'm sure it's got something to do with being on the road, because I guarantee you if these games were at the Fortress, those games finish 5-1 and 5-2 respectively. But it's just something to consider. It was a messy game for the Golden Knights. They kind of started slow. They didn't capitalize on their opportunities in the second period. But ultimately, the underlying statistics looked pretty good as they outshot Montreal 42-31, or 57 from the dot, 2 for 4 on the power play, 18 hits, and 18 blocks. Those were all good numbers. I have no complaints for those numbers in the slightest. Those all are great. But it was a little bit messy off the board. The eye test proves that while the Golden Knights are very good, they're obviously leading the NHL now in terms of points, but there's still a little bit of a ways to go in this team's ability to develop its kill gene, to run away with games and make sure that they don't get interesting. It's good TV, but it's very stressful TV, and I can only take so much. That being said, that's 7 wins in a row for the Golden Knights. We're coming up on the longest win streak in franchise history at 10. And ultimately, the next dance is a big one as we're heading to one of the more storied buildings in the game, taking on the Toronto Maple Leafs on Tuesday. So that being said, if you liked it, be sure to like the video. If you like it a lot, be sure to subscribe. Comment down below if you want to interact with me, as I love talking to you guys. And I will catch you guys in the next one. Hey guys, Future Ian here. The reason this video is a little bit late is because someone decided to start digging a trench outside my window. So I haven't had a moment's quiet since Saturday night. And ultimately, I know it's way later and, despite having a couple of days off with the Golden Knights not playing till Tuesday,
I'm well aware that it's Monday and I should have had this done on Sunday, but unless you guys wanted to hear the sound of jackhammers and whatever manner of heavy machinery was going on outside, I obviously didn't want to give you guys a bad experience, so I held off a day. Sorry for that. I'll try to avoid that from happening. I would have told them to go away, but ultimately they will not go away. So again, thanks for watching. Catch you guys later.